I,
Thanks.
yeah, sure.
But I agree with you. I think there is that perception because they have certain moral leanings or thinking that they do because they believe in, a certain religion where the left doesn't seem to be unified on that. The left has a plethora of different beliefs. There really isn't a single unifying structure that they can all follow under. I agree, on that aspect. I think it gets easy to sensationalize something in the media when something like Charlie Kirk happens and that whole thing goes down. They
Hmm.
can all unite under, well, we believe in God, we believe in this, we have this structure, we don't believe in violence, we believe in, loving thy neighbor. um
Right.
I just think it's really important from the top when we have, for especially when at his memorial, his wife is able to forgive the shooter. She comes out and says, I forgive him, I forgive this young man. But then
Right.
the president comes on stage afterwards and says, yeah, I don't do any of that.
Yeah.
I don't want my enemies to have what's best. I want them all to fail. Like, I think it's important that the president, can do that. He's the face of the nation. He can, if he can turn the temperature down, I think the rest of them will be able to follow.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And it's interesting to see people on the right excuse me, after it happened, I felt like the right a little bit for the first day, may have been a
Yeah,
little divided. Some people were like, "Oh, we need to fight back. This is war." And the other half were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. We need to turn the temperature down because
yeah,
the worst thing we can ha that can happen now is this goes way out of hand." And you're right, President Trump, or I don't know exactly what the quotes were, but I think you're right about his perception was not really about, hey, we all need to come together and unite. It was more of like, this is because of the left wing, because of the Democrats or whatever. There's this side picking and blaming as
mhm.
opposed to picking it as an opportunity to unite the country. Whereas I did like how some people on the right, and this isn't defending the right, it's defending
Sure.
the people who just say that they're more right leaning. People on the left were doing this too. Let's just say, whoever was doing this on either side, if you were the one that was saying, hey, you know what, this guy was not, we don't know if he was politically motivated, but he was an internet, whatever you want to call him, we're all internet people.
Yeah,
But this guy was like heads
hardcore.
down Reddit
Yeah,
thread, which
yeah.
that in itself isn't a wrong thing. I'm Reddit thread too about what's the new iPhone update. What
But there's a
this
difference.
this not it was more of like this nihilistic Charles Manson like
Yes.
kind of mentality where, okay, again, to my point earlier that wasn't recorded, that just gets by default thrown in as on the left
You're right. Right.
for no
You're,
reason. That's not
yeah.
political. That's
It's
just by
not.
default.
There is a problem, and I agree with you. There is a problem with, like, we have a nihilism problem in this country. We have an anger, nihilism. Nothing matters. Everything is false. It's everything. It's a conspiracy. They're trying to keep us down. And
Right.
I'm with you. I'm online too. I'm on Reddit. I'm on Threads. I'm always looking up stuff. Commenting, talking. But there's a difference between doing that and then you're on 4chan all day and you're in these angry communities and you're looking to blame something. You're looking to fill whatever it's like a hole that they don't have, that something's missing. What I
Hmm.
see with a lot of these shooters is that they try to find something to blame it on or someone to blame it on. And whether or not they come from the left or the right, and that's a conversation we can have too. The common thread is it's mental health, it's nihilism, it's a loss of faith in their system, their community, whatever was keeping them anchored before, it's gone now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think my point earlier, how Christianity gets, that's kind of the opposite of Christianity.
Yeah.
But by default, Christianity gets thrown on the right, even though Christianity in itself isn't political either way. Because in high school, we grew up kind of, my teacher made this point, which whether I agree or not, I don't know. I guess it just depends on like what are the top topics in politics today. She would say, if you're a Christian, if you're just a Christian, you kind of fall more on the right wing. But if you're Catholic, you're more left wing, which is interesting because both are Christian.
Yeah.
Because Catholicism focuses more on like helping, not like Christianity doesn't, but just I guess there's more of a focus in the Catholic communities to focus on thy neighbor, provide welfare, help this person, help that person, and focus. And when that's the focus of what you're doing, that tends to be more left-wing thinking.
True. Yeah, because traditionally, at least conservatives in America aren't typically the ones that will support those social programs, helping the homeless or helping feed the needy, that kind of thing. The mentality that I've seen is more of like, You have to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. You are responsible for taking control of your life, despite being Christians. But you're right. I can see that Catholics are a little bit more
Right.
interconnected in the community. They have more of those initiatives, which could be left wing thinking, more progressive thinking. But
Because like I know I helped out with Catholic Charities back in early college,
yeah.
and we were downtown in Little Mexico. I think it's Little Mexico it's called in Chicago.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we would give like furniture and help with them. And like, hey, we gave this mattress to this person's house. And the thinking was, well, what if somebody steals it? And our mindset was, well, if they stole it, they needed it too. So it's kind of like we helped someone. It was, but just it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but it's
Yeah.
like the point was to help someone.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Just
that
just to
that's
get
that's all
that.
we care. It's kind of it's kind of like a paradox, but it's like, yeah, it's we
Yeah.
help. That's the purpose here.
Somebody got helped. We
Right.
didn't really control where it went, but at least the mission was accomplished. Okay.
Right. So I don't want to go on. I know you've asked a bunch of questions before. I don't want to keep drifting off in a certain tangent. So if you have anything else, we can focus on too.
Sure.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
what was your initial, I guess, where we are, currently in the wake of his assassination? It's hardly the first time something, there's been political violence in this country.
Right.
What's your initial reaction? Are you seeing it as a certain problem on one side or the other? I mean, because political violence, it doesn't just encompass like, somebody going after a senator or someone going after, a very popular, right wing media personality, but it includes like, issues with our policing, maybe police brutality.
Right.
Anything that could be, a non-state versus a state actor, non-state versus non-state actor, anything that can, where do you think it's coming from? Just high level.
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, I think the obvious answer is during the election cycle, there was a lot of talk from the media, the news, politicians, where it was like the right Trump. I don't know how many times Trump was
Yeah,
called literally Hitler, even by Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton. And I don't remember who said exactly what,
sure.
but they did hear it a lot. And I don't want to blame them for this action. I'm just saying I remember in the election time, it's pretty recent. It was not even a year ago or around a year ago. He is Hitler. We have to do whatever it takes. Democracy is at stake. And then
Yeah,
JB Pritzker was like, this is equivalent to a Nazi Germany. So it's like, if that is the case, if they are telling the truth, then what are people supposed to do?
yeah,
Now, if somebody, it doesn't seem like the shooter I don't know, he could have been influenced by that. I don't know how many are. That might just be an excuse to say, hey, this was also said. But maybe
yeah.
these viewers aren't necessarily influenced by that. Are they? Maybe. I don't know. I don't have their history. I don't know what they're saying in their chats, so we can only assume.
So
But
it's interesting when we were in college, because we went to school like around the same time.
yeah,
I noticed when we were in school that it was the early days before everything was called woke and before the left was, everything's woke and super, soft. There was
yeah,
this whole movement of like social justice warriors. And that was a big thing
yeah.
in our school. And I noticed when we were in college, that's kind of where it started. Like everyone was in a club, everyone was supporting a cause. It wasn't even about helping people. It was about saying, look at me, look what I'm contributing. And I
Hmm.
noticed that from that point on, the temperature as far as like how nasty things got between both sides, it did start on the left. The left was responsible for canceling people. They didn't like a comment that you said 6 years ago, 10 years ago on Twitter. They'll call you employer, cancel you, they'll dox you. Or if you're a personality and you have some show or you have a TV show or some kind of thing coming out, they found something that you said, 10 years ago on a talk show, you're canceled, you're done. And I noticed that the
Right.
temperature came from that.
Hmm.
And fast forward today, I think the pendulum has swung to the other side. But my point is, none of it's wrong. None of it was okay. It's all wrong. We don't
Right.
win by tearing each other down. I agree with you on the point of you have these politicians on the left that were like calling him Hitler and saying all these things. I agree. I don't think we win when your political argument is that guy's Hitler. Don't vote for him, vote for me because I'm not Hitler. I don't think it works like that.
No, I agree.
I will say though, I get nervous when I see Trump in the media saying that he'll go after journalists. Or I have the
Hmm.
director of the FBI right now, years ago, publishing a children's book or a trilogy of children's books saying, oh, well, his first one was called "The Plot Against the King," referencing the 2016 Russian election interference, where they, had bot farms and troll accounts to try to sway some of the online presence and towards Trump's favor. Now, they didn't interfere with the election; they didn't do any polling things, But there
Right.
was a definitely a proven operation online to try to disseminate information regarding that campaign. I think it's my point. I
Sure.
think it's gross to call somebody Hitler, to say you should vote for me because that guy's Hitler. That's not a good enough reason to vote for you. I
Right.
also think it's gross to, as a presidential candidate or current president, to say that the journalist, American media is the enemy of my party, or to have a director of the FBI say, publish an enemies list, or a children's book saying that there's a plot to overthrow the king. We don't have kings. We have
Right.
presidents. That's my only problem. I think that's why I'm saying there is a temperature check on both sides. We've gotten into
Yeah.
this, like, you see what I'm, yeah,
I no, I totally agree because I'm in the middle here. I consider myself, I guess you could
yeah,
say conservative, but I think I'm more libertarian where I kind of sit in the middle of this and I hate Trump for these things, but
yeah,
like him for these things. Joe Biden, I kind of like for these things, but didn't like him for a lot of these things too. Sure, I guess you could say because I did the I side with quiz where you
yeah.
answer these questions and I go deep and very specific and I
Sure.
really try to make myself because I want to know.
Yeah, you're thorough. I remember you're very. I remember being your RA or whatever. You're very thorough. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I
You're
don't know
very
what you remember.
detail
Yeah.
oriented.
But I remember looking, but then you can go back and see where you stood on the elections that took place 20, 30, 40 years ago. I'm a JFK Democrat.
Okay, yeah.
Me and Nixon, it was like JFK and Nixon. I was like 65, 70% for both candidates.
Okay.
But it kind of shows you like I'm an old school,
Old
I
school.
guess you would say on the fence even then, Democrat. And if you look through all of the last couple of years, my bottom two candidates were Trump Biden, or it would be Trump Harris. 2020, it was
Yeah,
Trump Biden, Trump Hillary. Those are my like bottom two candidates the last three elections of all the listed ones that were like one-off third party libertarian.
yeah.
They're always the last ones. So I'm really in the middle here. I feel
You know, I you,
like because of
I
that, I
think,
get to see
yeah,
both. One second. I feel like I get to
yeah,
kind of absorb what both sides are doing kind of from a neutral position. Obviously, everyone's algorithm has their bias,
sure.
but I feel like I don't know. What I listen to is I feel like it's pretty neutral, maybe with a bias a certain direction, but I don't know. I feel like I've had a fair kind of absorption of what's happening. Not like it makes me any more.
No, as do most Americans. Most Americans, I would imagine, are probably moderates, which what I will say is probably what hurt Harris when she was running. A, she didn't really have a lot of time, but even then, she's had enough clout and enough success and enough face time with her own party that she should have been able to pull it off. But I don't think she was. I don't think she was moderate enough for the moderates, obviously, which is why they either didn't vote or they voted third party or some other candidate or they voted for Trump. I think we have
Mhm.
a problem right now is we have a problem between both parties. We have two extremes. We have far right extremes with Trump and his base and people who will believe anything he says. And I don't think they genuinely believe in him. I think they like what they're getting from him. I think it's
Mhm.
before I, it's a small tangent, but I think
Yeah.
it's interesting that before Trump, no one really knew about who Tulsi Gabbard was. And she
Yeah.
found a way to kind of throw her hat into his camp. And now all of a sudden she's got book deals. She's on podcasts all the time. She's got a massive social media presence. I think a lot of his support, and not just, and it's not a right thing. I think a lot of his support is because, hey, I can make money on being on this side. And I think a lot of that also happened on the left. I think we have people like AOC with, again, no one knew who she was, but all of a sudden she goes from, bartender overnight. She's a politician. She's successful. She's a massive face now because she's saying the things that get people to click on her engagement. I think what we really need is a hard reset for both parties. We need to go back to the days where where it wasn't about engagement and fame or clicks, where we could just have a guy like a Mitt Romney or a guy like Obama have a debate and talk about political things and policy differences. I think there's an issue. I think that's where some of the temperature problem comes from.
Yeah, I mean, with Tulsi Gabbard, I had interesting because like I knew who she was because I mean, I'm probably one off, but I actually voted for her in the primary in 2020 for the Democratic side.
I mean, before that, because I mean, because there was
Yeah.
a time when she was a hard charger progressive on the left, and all of a sudden she's, his favorite.
I
Uh,
think what really flipped her was
yeah,
what we were doing in the war in Syria and how we were supporting Al Qaeda in Syria, and she fought against Al Qaeda in Iraq. So it was kind of like, what are we doing?
yeah,
One of her big quotes is like, I fought against the war on terror, not for the war on terror.
okay.
that's kind of the big thing. But anyway, that's again, we can side tangent on all this stuff if we want to. But I do want to kind of keep the focus on the Charlie Kirk.
Sure.
And like, remember you kind of mentioning how you kind of said that he wasn't for the good or something, or I don't know, I don't want to misquote you with what your question was on that, or your side
Um,
on that.
I think he spent year. I think what he did, and I don't think it's really a reflection of his character, because I don't think he's an because like when he was murdered, right? A
Right.
lot of the uproar from the left was, that's what Nazis get. He was a Nazi. He was a
Mhm.
fascist. I don't think he's any of that. I think at the if we look at it, Charlie Kirk was a glorified performer. He was a YouTuber. He made content. I don't think he was a politically powerful figure. I think he was powerful in the sense that he had a big voice, but I think he was a performer. He's a YouTuber. A court jester is what I'm saying. I just think what he was a product of was that type of content where we're going to go to a college campus and we're going to debate a freshman in college or sophomore who doesn't know what they're talking about. And we have a specific list of questions and cherry picked facts, things that will fit what we believe in. I mean, I watched one recently with Steven Crowder. He goes on college
Yeah.
campuses and he has a little booklet of facts. And I watched one of his discussions regarding his thing was the left is violent, change my mind.
Yeah.
And his
Recently,
whole
yeah.
argument was that the left was more violent, and he couldn't even admit in one of his conversations that the assassination of Melissa Hortman was purely political. I mean,
Yeah.
my problem is Charlie Kirk wasn't necessarily a monster, but he was part of that machine where they go and they do these debates and they try to own libs, and all it does is just kind of fuel more of that divide. I don't believe when I see Crowder sit down and when he says I want to have common ground, have a conversation, change my mind. I don't think he wants his mind changed. I think it's performative.
I actually interesting how you brought up Crowder. So I remember when Crowder started back when we were in college. That was kind of like he was
Yeah,
like the first guy to go on college campuses and kind of sit down and have a booth. And I kind of liked him at first because he was the first guy to do this. I was interested. I was like, oh, cool. Like
yeah,
we get to hear what someone has to say. This is new. This was when this kind of whole internet thing kind of became new. It's
mhm,
kind of when, and I was talking to friends about this too. When we were in college, and I would say late high school, social media was social with like you and your friends and family, and that was social media. There
yeah.
wasn't influencers, a little bit, but it wasn't main social
Not like
media.
how it is now.
It was like right when
Yeah,
we kind of finished college, social media became not your friends and family. It became
yeah,
like media. So
yes,
now what you see from then until now, even now, it's almost hardly friends and family. So everything on the internet now, social media wise, is influencer this, that, whatever. So Crowder was one of the first ones to kind of be this kind of influencer that you would see on YouTube or Louder with Crowder. It was Change My Mind back
yeah,
then or whatever. And I felt like I kind of liked him at first, but then it kind of ran dry because to your point, it he would not really have great arguments after a while to questions, and he became more of a troll than he did someone who would actually try to like
yeah,
be genuine. And
yes.
I didn't like that, but I felt like with Charlie Kirk, it seemed more genuine and it seemed more compassionate than Crowder. And there was a distinction for me, which is why I think Crowder stopped doing what he was doing. He says it was because of violence, but I think it was more because he wasn't as effective.
I think so too.
Charlie Kirk, I think he got way bigger because I think for the most part, he was more genuine and he was more compassionate and he had better arguments and he knew way more facts about what he was talking about. And he convinced the crowds to like kind of go along with his opinions because they like didn't have anything. So they kind of like what he had to say. And that's kind of how he became bigger because he was more compassionate, he knew more and way more effective at what he was trying to do.
I agree. I agree. I remember that period where he said he was going to stop. He's like, "Oh, I don't want to get hurt as violent," but it wasn't that. It wasn't that. There was definitely a drop off in the interest people had in him. He wasn't as effective. I agree with the one thing I'll give Kirk credit on was that he would have these conversations and he actually tried to have and sit down and talk and go back and forth. And
Yeah.
a lot of people, and to the left's dismay, would show up and they were immediately angry. They were ready to fight, and I think
Hmm.
that's a problem that needs to be solved before we actually have real conversations. Because while I'll give credit, I'll say yes, he was trying to have conversations. He was more factual. He was more compassionate. It was already during a time where people were so used to the college, owning videos and owning the libs that people were already
Yes.
hardwired to be angry, and they'd show up and be like, I don't want to have a conversation, even though he might wanted to have that.
Right. I think that is actually a great point to bring up. People kind of had this mentality, oh, he's
Yeah.
just here for this, which he maybe really wasn't. But it was in the mindset of people are out there that are doing that. Is he one of these people? It kind of seems very similar. He has a
Yeah.
table, he has a booth, he has a microphone. So what I like about him is I look back at some of his videos now and I'm like, wow, you know what? He seems to almost when you watch the longer ones, because short ones you don't get that because you're not
Yeah.
long enough.
Yep.
When you get to ones that are longer than a minute, they become you can see that he tries to agree with you on something.
Okay.
Maybe you disagree. Here's the point. What's your point? What's your argument? Let's try to agree on this. There's one video that I saw last week where it was like his father and his son,
Mhm.
and they were both mad because the father was a liberal and or the was a conservative and the son was a Democrat or whatever it was,
Yeah.
vice versa. But the son was making a point. Oh, Dad, like you're just an angry lib, blah blah. And Charlie's like, okay, honor your father. What's he trying
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
here? Be nice. And he's
Yeah.
like, you're both trying to make the world better and do whatever this, right? And they're both like, yeah. And he's like, see, we agree on something at least now. So it seems like he's trying to always get somebody to agree on something, and that would always put a smile on both the him and the person's face. And maybe they wouldn't agree ultimately, but it just seemed like there was some sort of genuine like hope,
Connection, like a better conversation.
connection first,
So let me, I agree. I agree. I think he was trying to be a little bit better faith. Uh,
which I don't think Crowder ever. I never saw him do that.
no, I've seen his content a lot, so I'm very familiar with it. He was never the person to really try to have that kind of connection. It was always about trolling, owning somebody. Same thing with Ben Shapiro. I don't think he ever really wanted to have a conversation. I
Mhm.
think his goal was, I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you. I'm going to prove it right here on this
Yeah.
campus. I think I agree, which is why it's disappointing when a figure like him gets killed, because that means we can't really have conversations. It shows that regardless of who did it, who's responsible for it, it shows a certain level of, wow, I don't know if we can do that, because there's now it's a massive risk. Now somebody can get potentially hurt for simply having a conversation. Now,
Well, it gets people talking more. I mean, we're having
true.
this talk now because of influence from him,
Now,
ironically.
I will say though, I want to kind of pivot a bit. I want to ask
Yeah.
what you thought about, because I after he was killed, they have this memorial, okay,
Yeah.
and his face isn't on the invitation. They're selling merchandise there. I just think it's a bit weird that when this thing happens, conservatives are like I mean, it's part of the business. I
Well, his face, okay, I did see that post.
Yeah.
His face was on the first one, but then when they had the speakers, he wasn't on that one. So
Okay.
I don't know if it was like a different one. I don't, okay. I didn't, it's hard when it's like
Yeah.
there's so much content. Like you see,
Yeah.
I saw one of them where it was like, here was the first invitation. Then the follow-ups had like the speakers' voices with like Trump and Vance and whoever else, Megyn Kelly, I think, or I don't remember who else. But I guess it depends on what invitation, what is the invitation you're talking about then? I
I
don't
guess
know.
okay, okay. My point is bringing this up.
Okay.
When this thing happens and it's a horrible
Mhm.
thing,
Yeah,
isn't it a little weird that that the other side, the right, Trump, Vance, Megyn Kelly, all these people, these big figures,
right.
they all kind of use it to kind of plug themselves almost. Like I get that it's you can be sad about him, you can speak and show respect, but there was a certain aspect of that where it was like this seems like we're you guys are at a stadium and there's speakers and there's all these political the president's there who's saying that he doesn't forgive his enemies. You have all these people who might have known him in a professional sense, but this is somebody that was just murdered. And what that looked like to me was a campaign rally.
Whew. I don't know. I didn't think about it that way. I mean, I can see maybe why
Yeah,
people think that, and I don't want to dismiss that idea, but I don't know. I never thought about that. I'm like, oh, cool, a
yeah,
memorial for a guy who was just massive amongst, like, to me, he was on my feed the last 5, 6 years, just scrolling through. Like, I
yeah.
would just these clips, I'd be like, oh, cool, what does he have to say? I don't agree with him on everything, but I always wanted to know what does he have to say about this topic? It's interesting. So
Okay.
I think he was just such a massive influence on people, and it was a big deal. Now, was it kind of propped up by the money that wants to make it political? Maybe. I don't know. I don't I just don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I just didn't see it that way when I saw it.
Okay.
I thought it was really cool that when I saw it. And that's kind of where I stand. I mean,
Okay. We
Could it
can,
be political?
yeah,
Maybe, but
we can disagree on that, but I mean, but
I
this
don't
is a
know.
part of that machine. You know, it
Yeah.
is. I mean, I would imagine if there was, well, like I can't imagine it because they didn't do this. I mean, when Melissa Hortman was killed, they didn't have this big memorial, this big spectacle. Now you can say that it's maybe she didn't have as massive of an audience, but she was a political figure. She was a senator.
Yeah.
You know,
But she was a state senator. No one knew who she was even before,
I
after she was.
agree. I agree. So maybe if there is a person on the left and this happens, and I hope it doesn't, we can see the comparison then, you know, if it's worthy of even looking at. But my
Yeah.
question is, you know, I think it's a little strange when someone dies and there's the anger and there's the celebrations on the left going, yeah, we're happy. That's what Nazis. He's not a Nazi, okay. But then I also think it's
I'm
weird.
not saying you're not saying you said it is not. You're saying people have said.
I saw a lot of celebrations on social media, leftist accounts, journalists, influencers, people with like thousands of followers, you know, pretty big audiences
Yeah.
celebrating it, saying that it was good that he did, that they're not upset. I think it's wrong. I think we all lose when
Yeah.
something like that
I think
happens.
we agree on that.
But I also think it's odd on the right when, you know, maybe you didn't see it that way, but it is when there's such a big spectacle, when it's a televised broadcast and there's a big stadium and there's all these speakers and there's merchandise tents. I just think it's weird. But it might be that industry, that machine, because he was
It's
part of that.
hard. Yeah, it's hard to say because like what's the last big figure on the left who died like this?
Yeah.
There hasn't really, I don't
Hasn't
think there
happened
has
yet.
been one yet. Not like to say I want there to be one or
Right.
whatever. Like we haven't experienced
We haven't.
this level of somebody who was like so big and then was assassinated, where it's like, whoa, like it's one thing if like a president dies. I mean, when the president dies, it's kind of like there's a big funeral, but it's kind of like when a president dies, they're like 97, and it's like, well, we haven't even heard about this person in
Yeah.
15 years. So I guess we'll have to see if this happens on the other side to know for sure if it was like a show or this should happen. Maybe it's
Yeah.
like deserved. I don't know.
So I will say I do. We probably should wrap this up because I got the 10-minute timer. I'm using the free Zoom, but I want to,
Okay.
yeah. But so I just want to say thank you for meeting and talking. This is a really good conversation.
Mhm.
I do want to ask you one last question, and then we can kind of like say our last pieces and then close it down. Um,
Sure.
Statistically, right now, you can look on PBS. They have a whole article where they link a bunch of different studies. Right now, and
Yeah.
I'll say this including over the past couple months, there has been an uptake of more left wing violence. It's more left wing extremism since the Charlie Kirk assassination. But overall,
Sure.
since the 90s, most of the violence, it's like 75%, most of it comes from far right extremism. I'm not blaming a politician, but
Okay.
most of the rhetoric, the manifestos, it's always linked to like the Melissa Hortman assassination. The shooter had like a list of pro-choice targets and organizations and advocates. A lot of the violence, school shooters, police brutality, a lot of it is far right extremism. The numbers prove that. You know, that was my biggest problem with Crowder's video recently when he said the left is more
Right.
violent. And I just looked at the stats. I said, well, right now, most of it comes from the far right. And most of the condemnation from the left is older Democrats, people like my age and up. But the younger ones are a little bit more angry. They're a little bit more politically charged. A lot of them
Sure.
think it's acceptable or don't completely disavow it. But can you, I mean, are you able to admit that most of the political violence, most of the extremism has come from far right area? And I'm not making that up. Those are real
Okay.
numbers.
No,
Yeah.
I've seen those
Yeah.
charts, but how do they classify it as like right-wing violence? Are they just saying, oh, this was a left-wing person who was attacked, therefore it's got to be right-wing violence? Or how do they know? Like, what's the classification to even make it left or right? Because like this guy
Yeah.
that the shooter Charlie Kirk, I like my to our first point. I guess you'd have to by default say left wing, but is it really? Like,
Is it
how do they
really?
classify
Yeah.
categorization of like if it's left or right wing violence? If it might not be political at all, it's
Well,
just
from what I've
towards
seen,
like,
so from what I've seen, they look at the motive. They look at like if the person has a manifesto, like the with the Melissa Hortman assassination, it was pretty clear cut that
yeah,
he had a list of pro choice advocates and politicians, people and organizations. Um, typically what I've seen is left wing violence. You can see it because
we also blame Tim Walz for his stances.
I
So
know
it's like how, but it's kind of like would that be both? Would that be just one or the other? Like how do you it's
in that scenario, because it was against a left leaning person, you can say it was right wing. Now with Charlie Kirk, I can agree with you. I'll say that it looks like it was more left motivated. He came
Right.
from a conservative family, but he had more left-leaning tendencies. I think it's fair. I'll give that. I think it's fair to say that was more left-wing. But typically, left-wing violence comes in the form of like vandalism or like eco-terrorism, like like these animal rights organizations,
Hmm.
these kinds of like more like left-leaning progressive ones, or
Yeah.
but typically the right-leaning violence, and the numbers back it up. They say that the most mass casualty events are from right wing extremists. Typically, what's a left leaning, if you're bombing an office, they wait until after dark. Or if you're bombing a political rival's office, it's like they wait till it's like nighttime. I can leave a little bit of time out.
Yeah, no, I just don't. I got to be honest.
Yeah,
I don't want to admit something if I don't know how
sure.
the numbers came about, and I'm willing to if I can see the data, but I just don't.
Here, you know what?
I just
I'm gonna,
don't know enough about like how they classify it, and if I agree with the classification to know for sure. Because just like how I don't really agree right
yeah,
now yet, I can see why people say it. Might be
yeah.
obvious that the shooter was on the left from Charlie Kirk, but was he political? And if he's apolitical, I guess it's hard to say. Like, I
I
mean,
think we can agree that the real conversation is he was disturbed and alone and cut off and a nihilist.
yeah.
At least for that one, especially. But I did just send you something in the chat real quick before this
Sure.
conversation
Let me try to
ends.
pull this up. Okay. I mean,
Um,
yeah, because I've seen, if this is the chart I think it is, I've seen these charts where it's like, it shows like it's definitely left is less than the right, and the right's definitely more. And I don't know if I have time to read through this really.
yeah, and honestly,
Yeah, just,
I may have to send you another invite because we're still kind of
yeah.
going.
No, that's fine. I mean, let's do
Yeah,
it. If you have time,
yeah,
I have time or
yeah.
whatever.
Let's do it.
Um,
They cite, so this is a PBS article. They cite the 2015 Charleston church shooting and the where that Dylan Roof killed 9 black parishioners. So
mhm.
that's so the whole. So I did, and I do trust Wikipedia. I know some people don't trust Wikipedia, but it's been a long time since you've been able to like log in and then like edit a page. Nowadays they have it locked down pretty tight, and they're pretty good at when it comes to monitoring the information. But this is the definition I've been using for political violence.
Sure.
I don't know if you can see it actually. Hold on one second. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, share.
Um,
But yeah, if we have to just, I don't know if you have time after this, or
yeah,
if you want to just like take a break and then like send me a new link. I don't know how that would work.
yeah. I'll tell you what. Let's take 5, and I'll send you a new link. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
Yep.